Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Gallego, no. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Marshall, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Padilla, no. Mrs. Hyde Smith, aye. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Hickenlooper, Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Johnson, aye. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Kim, no. Mr. Husted, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Ms. Warren, no. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Coons, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Ms. Rosen, no. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Sanders, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 48, the nays are 45, and the confirmation is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's actions. The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Rebecca L. Tableson of Wisconsin to be United States Circuit Judge for the 7th Circuit, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Rebecca L. Tableson of Wisconsin to be the United States Circuit Court Judge for the 7th Circuit shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsop-Brooks, Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Banks, Barrasso, Blackburn, Britt, Capito, Cassidy, Collins, Cornyn, Cotton, Crapo, Cruz, Curtis, Daines, Fisher, Graham, Grassley, Haggerty, Hoven, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Justice, Kennedy, Langford, Lee, Lummis, Marshall, McConnell, Moody, Marino, Mullen, Murkowski, Paul, Risch, Schmidt, Scott of Florida, Scott of South Carolina, Sullivan, Thune, Tillis, Tuberville, and Wicker. Senators voting in the negative: Baldwin, Booker, Cantwell, Coons, Duckworth, Durbin, Fetterman, Gallego, Hassan, Heinrich, Kane, Kim, King, Klobuchar, Lujan, Murphy, Murray, Padilla, Peters, Reed, Rosen, Sanders, Schiff, Smith, Warner, Warren, Whitehouse, and Wyden. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Bennett, no. Ms. Hirono, no. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Ricketts. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Ms. Slotkin. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, no. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, Aye. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Ms. Also Brooks, no. Mr. McCormick, aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Mr. Hawley, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Budd. Mr. Budd, aye. Ms. Ernst. Ms. Ernst, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 45, and the motion to invoke cloture on the nomination of Rebecca L. Tableson is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
The judiciary, Rebecca L. Tableson of Wisconsin, to be United States Circuit Judge for the 7th Circuit.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, just to remind our colleagues, we've had now a series 3 votes and a couple of them on judges, but one of the votes in there was on a Senator Johnson proposal that would have paid all federal employees who are currently working in the middle of a shutdown. Now, I don't know how you explain, if you have any federal employees, how you would vote against something that would make sure that in the middle of a government shutdown, if they continue to work, that they get paid. That's all it was. Very simple, very straightforward. And for the life of me, again, I think the other side is in a very bad headspace right now to vote against something like that. If you have any federal employees in your state, obviously a lot of them here in this area, all of our staffs are currently not getting paid. Senator Johnson tried to correct that today by calling up a bill, which we just voted on, in which, once again, Democrats here in this chamber voted against. We've had in front of us, we've had a dozen votes now on a continuing resolution that would open up the government. It's been sitting at the desk now for some time. The House has passed it. We need 5 Democrats to join us. send it to the President. He will sign it into law. The government opens up. It's clean. It's nonpartisan. It has no policy riders, no partisan gimmicks attached to it. It's a straightforward continuing resolution to fund the government until a certain time. And Senator Johnson's was even more straightforward than that, really, because it simply said that if you are a federal employee and you are currently working today, like everybody here in this chamber, you will get paid. And I can't explain what's going on, and on the other side of the aisle, but they consistently come down here and vote against paying people who are working every single day and not getting paid. So, Mr. President, that was the vote we had just a couple of votes ago. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the post-cloture time with respect to the Tableson nomination be expired and the Senate vote on confirmation of the nomination at a time to be determined by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Democratic Leader no earlier than Monday, October the 27th. Further, if confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
With that objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the measure. The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to executive session and consider executive calendar number 295.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. It appears the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the judiciary, Jordan Emery Pratt of Florida to be United States District Judge for the Middle District.
President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the nomination of Jordan Emery Pratt of Florida to be United States District Judge for the Middle District of Florida, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent to reading the names be waived,
Without objection.
and I move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion's agreed to.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to executive session to consider executive calendar number 457.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. It appears the ayes have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the judiciary, Edmund G. LaCour, Jr. of Alabama to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of Alabama.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the nomination of Edmund G. LaCour, Jr. of Alabama to be United States District Judge for the Northern District of Alabama, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent to reading the names be waived.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Couple of topics I'd like to talk about. First, the government shutdown. I don't know what my friends on the other side expect. We will talk about the Affordable Care Act at the right time, starting with the idea it's not affordable. And you created a law without any Republican votes. You had the subsidies expire. That was your choice. Most of us believe that the Obamacare program you created is very expensive, and we're not going to extend it. We would look at trying to make it better. The president has a brilliant idea about how better to use the money to help consumers. Senator Marshall just left. So we're not going to, whether you open the government up or not, I'm not going to change my vote. I'm not going to vote to authorize these subsidies as they are. I'm not going to vote to repeal the good work we did under the big, beautiful bill. So let's open up the government and talk. And if you don't want to do that, then a lot of people are going to have their lives turned upside down for no good reason, because I don't feel like we should be held hostage here to get a legislative outcome to open up the government. We tried that as Republicans. You got to build the wall or we won't open the government. It's probably not a good idea for us. Didn't work out well for us, and nothing else learned from what we did. So I'm hoping the government will open soon. Dangerous time to have the federal government not functioning in the security space. It's danger for air travel, but if you haven't noticed, the world's a pretty dangerous place. So I want to talk about two things, China and Russia. President Trump is traveling to South Korea, and I think he's going to meet Chinese President Xi. I don't mind talking with people that I disagree with. I like the fact that President Trump has reached out to adversaries, try to find common ground to end conflicts that have been very destructive. So when it comes to President Trump and Russia, he's made a full court press to try to get Russia at the table to find a way to end the bloodbath in Ukraine, to make it an outcome that's acceptable to all parties. I don't think President Trump's out to humiliate Putin at all, but he does want to end the war in a way that we don't have a third invasion. So I appreciate what he's done, and it's been a very aggressive effort to engage the parties. In the past, we kind of ignored Putin. I don't think that's the right solution. But we've come to a point now where every time President Trump talks about a proposal to end the bloodbath, Putin has a reason not to get there. The latest proposal by President Trump is to have a ceasefire in place. Stop the fighting, stop the killing at the line of contact, go back to your respective sides, and we'll sit down and find a way forward to get a comprehensive deal. That's the best proposal I've heard from anybody. Ukraine said yes, Europe said yes, Putin says no. Putin continues to attack Ukraine. They show no indication of wanting to stop this war until they meet their war aims. Well, let me tell Russia, your war aims are not going to be accepted by the United States and Ukraine. Putin said today that he would respond fiercely if we increase the lethality of the Ukrainian military. Well, you said that a lot. I want the war to end. I don't want anything Russia has. I just want the war to end in an honorable and just way. So if you expect Ukraine to give you territory that you don't occupy today, that would create a pathway to Kyiv in the future, make them very vulnerable to a third invasion, it's not going to happen. And I know Putin could care less about how many Russians die. They say 1 million casualties. I don't know. Who knows? I know this. His respect for life is pretty low. North Koreans, people from all over the Russian provinces have been thrown into a meat grinder, and he could really care less. He does care about his own lifestyle. Beyond that, I don't think he cares less, could care less. His economy is selling cheap oil and gas to fuel his war machine. So he's selling gas and oil well below market prices, Putin, to get the money to continue the attack on Ukraine. So President Trump and myself and many of us here are suggesting to those who buy cheap Russian oil and gas, stop it so we can find a way to get Putin to the peace table. The largest 3 customers buying Russian oil and gas that do not help Ukraine are China, India, and Brazil. If those 3 customers told Putin it's time to wind this war down, then I think the war would be over pretty quickly, because without oil and gas money, he can't prosecute the war. I understand wanting to buy cheap Russian oil, but I don't understand a country that buys cheap Russian oil knowing that it's going to be used to kill innocent people and acquire land from others by force of arms. I've been told that our friends in India are very proud. You have a lot to be proud of. I've been told that our friends in India are trying to find a way to be less dependent on Russian oil. To our friends in India, well done. Before the invasion by Putin, India was buying 3% of their oil from Russia. After the invasion, it went up to almost 30%. Why? They were buying it below market prices from Russia, refining it in India and selling it at a profit. That's not something to be proud of. I'm hopeful that you're going to abandon that practice to get us to a place where we can end the war in Russia and stop the killing. So there's some progress there. As to China, if President Xi called Putin tomorrow and said, it's now time to wind this conflict down, you need to get to the peace table, I think Putin would not have much of a choice. China is the #1 customer of Russian oil. If they made a decision tomorrow to change that practice, then I think Putin's ability to prosecute the war would hit a wall. Now, President Trump is going to talk to Xi, hopefully, here soon. And there'll be a lot of issues on the table. As to China, it's a communist dictatorship. I'm no fan of the Chinese Communist Party. To say otherwise would be misleading. Having said that, there's times that we can do business with China for the betterment of all of us. This is one of those times. I'm hoping that when President Trump meets with President Xi, if that happens, that he will be able to persuade President Xi it's now time to end the bloodbath in Ukraine. I need your help to get Putin to the table. And to China, if you were able to do that, I think it would open up opportunities between you, the United States, China, the United States, and the Western world to have a better relationship. If China wants to be a meaningful member of the international community and wants to be treated better, then act better. If you want to be treated normally, act normal. So to China, you have the power to help end this war. I would urge you to work with President Trump to achieve that goal. It will make the world a better place, and I think it will inure to the benefit of China. Sanctions were put on the 2 largest oil companies in Russia yesterday by Secretary Bessent at the direction of President Trump. I think President Trump has come to believe that Putin doesn't want a ceasefire at the line of contact, and everybody but him does. And I hope President Trump's new policy will be, I'm not going to talk to Russia anymore until they agree to a ceasefire at the line of contact like Ukraine has. Once that agreement's reached, then we can sit down and try to end this war. I hope he will tell President Xi that you have the chance to help me in this war, please do. I, along with the presiding officer of the Senate, many of us, 85 co-sponsors, we have legislation allowing President Trump, at his choice, to impose tariffs on countries that buy cheap Russian oil to prop up Putin's war machine that don't help Ukraine, and that would be China. So President Trump has used tariffs robustly, I think, to the benefit of our country. If he decides to go down the road of going after Putin's customers, he would have the blessing of the Congress, the House and the Senate. I can't think of an issue that's brought us together as a body in the Senate more than the desire to end this war in Ukraine and to use all the tools available to help President Trump get Putin's attention. The fact that Democratic colleagues, who are probably not a big fan of this president, are willing to empower the president to have tariff authority given to him by the Congress that would be bulletproof in court, speaks well to them, and it speaks loudly to the idea that the Senate is united when it comes to standing up to Putin and those who prop him up to end this bloodbath. This bill has been around for a long time. People ask me all the time, what's going to happen? I think President Trump has made a decision that a ceasefire in place is the right way to start discussions about how to end the war, and I hope he will stick with that position. I will expect the Senate to move the legislation I just described, the Russian Sanctions Act, that allows secondary tariffs against countries that buy cheap Russian oil. I would expect us to move that fairly soon. The Senate also has passed legislation making Russia a state sponsor of terrorism under U.S. law. There are 4 countries that fall in that category. Russia would be the 5th, for kidnapping over 19,000 Ukrainian children in the occupied areas. This is a very big deal to many of us. We've gone to Ukraine, we've heard the stories that Russia has occupied about 20-something percent of Ukraine, and they've literally taken Ukrainian children from their families, sent them to Russia, in indoctrination camps to turn these Ukrainian children against their own country. It's despicable. And it's not 200. I do believe the number is closer to 20,000. We have a lot of evidence, and I'll have a hearing in the Foreign Operations Subcommittee about it. But the bill making Russia a state sponsor of terrorism for kidnapping the children went through the Foreign Relations Committee yesterday unanimously. It's ready to come to the floor. And I can't think of a better description of Putin's Russia than a state sponsor of terrorism. You've earned that distinction. Now, if you'll turn the children over, that goes away. But he denies really the fact that he's taken Ukrainian children away from their families to Russia. Well, he's lying. He's lying through his teeth. So that's coming. And there are $300 billion of frozen Russian assets overseas. And we have legislation here, Senator Kennedy and others, that would take that money for the benefit of Ukraine. All 3 of these pieces of legislation are ripe. They're ready to go. And after this last rebuff by Putin of President Trump, now's the time to act. There was supposed to be a meeting in Budapest between President Trump and President Putin. Well, that is off now because the goal was to have a ceasefire at the line of contact. Ukraine said yes immediately. Comes to find that Russia has not changed its position at all. So I don't think that meeting is going to occur, and that's a good thing. No more meeting Putin until he changes his behavior. I think now's the time to put pressure on Putin's war machine economically. Now's the time to make Ukraine more lethal when it comes to defending itself. The Tomahawks. President Trump is right. It's a complicated weapon system. But I would like to see some Tomahawks transferred to Europe and start a training program so that Ukrainians one day would be able to utilize these weapons. Now, why do we want that weapon? It could go deep into Russia and knock out factories that make drones that come from Iran and to destroy missile factories that are used to terrorize the Ukrainian people at night. I think we have a moment here to act decisively with our European partners. I appreciate what President Trump has done to try to solve this conflict through diplomacy. I appreciate what he's done to make Ukraine more lethal, providing more weapons by selling to Europe weapons to the benefit of Ukraine. I appreciate the sanctions that were imposed yesterday, and I think they're having a beneficial effect already. But I think we need to do more. So as President Trump engages President Xi, it is my hope that the Chinese will change their position about this war and work with President Trump to get Putin's attention to find a way to end the bloodbath honorably and justly. Now, why do I keep talking about China? There is no way Putin can prosecute this war if China decided to isolate Russia and stop buying their oil. And we would find ways to help China with their oil needs so they wouldn't be at a loss. If that happened, then this war would end pretty quickly. So to President Trump, good luck. I'm glad you're talking to China about a bunch of things, including trade. I'm sure you'll talk about the recent efforts of the Chinese Communist Party to go after Christians in an unprecedented way in China. The Christian church is under assault. We have a lot of differences with China, but if China wants to change its relationship with the United States, you have a chance in the next few days to do it in a positive way. And to China, if I and others believed that you used your influence with Putin to end this bloodbath in Ukraine, it would be the benefit of you over time. I would respond differently than I have in the past. I think Western Europe would respond differently than they have in the past. So this is an opportunity for China to do something good for the world. You have it in your power to get Putin's attention unlike anybody else on the planet. I would urge you to use that power to end the bloodbath. And if you choose to continue to buy cheap Russian oil to fuel Putin's war machine, to benefit your economy, then you should not be surprised that we push back hard. It's your choice. But I am speaking for most everybody in this body where we believe the time has come for China, India, and Brazil to stop profiting off this war. The time has come to end this bloodbath. And to China, India, and Brazil, you have the power, if you would use it, to get Putin's attention like no one else on the planet. To India, you're definitely moving in the right direction. China made some announcements today about maybe reducing their purchases of Russian oil. All of this is good. And the reason I keep talking about this is I've concluded that unlike anybody else on the planet, China can, if they choose to, help us end this war better than anybody. So I'm appealing to President Xi to help President Trump end a war that should have been ended a long time ago. And I'm very concerned if this war continues, then the relationship between the United States and China is going to get worse, not better, and I seek it to be better. So, Madam President, you've been involved in everything I've just said. You've been one of the leading champions of protecting the Ukrainian children kidnapped by the Russians. You're one of the first people that sponsored the legislation. You've been to Ukraine numerous times. I knew you have a personal relationship with Ukraine. It goes back to a long time ago when you were actually involved with Ukraine and Ukrainian families spending some time there. You have been a strong, consistent voice that Russia needs to stop. We need to end the war, not continue the war. And to my Senate colleagues, you've been asking me a long time, when are we going to move your bill? It's not my bill, it's our bill. The time has come. I'm hoping, and I believe the majority leader agrees, that the time has come. We'll wait to see what happens in China, but if nothing changes in China, then we need to have a week, I believe, of where this body focuses on applying pressure against Russia to end this conflict for the betterment of the world. With that, I yield.
Madam President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to honor my friend and great American, Richard Moe, who we lost to Parkinson's disease at the age of 88 on September 15th of this year. Dick leaves behind a legacy that shaped Minnesota and our country and my own life and career. And Madam President, I understand that some of Richard Moe's family are visiting us in the gallery today, and I want to, through you, welcome them to the chamber. From leading Minnesota's Democratic Farmer Labor Party at only 32, to serving as chief advisor to Walter Mondale in the Senate and the White House, to spending 17 years as president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Dick leaves behind a remarkable legacy of public service. Dick was born in Duluth, Minnesota, fondly called the San Francisco of the Great Lakes to those of us who love it. He was born there in 1936. He became active in Minnesota politics at a very young age. At 24 and right out of college, he volunteered to be a driver for Minneapolis Mayor Hubert Humphrey when he was running first for the Senate. Dick was, as I said, Humphrey's driver, and reportedly was so nervous driving the great man around that he drove Humphrey right into a gate at one point, an event that thankfully was not a career-ending move for him. A few years later, when he was only 32, Humphrey recruited Dick to lead Minnesota's Democratic Farmer Labor Party, and there Dick showed really exceptional political intuition and skill, where he led Minnesota Democrats to win majorities in the state legislature for the first time ever. His political and organizing skills caught the eye of Senator Walter Mondale, who recruited Dick to come work on his Washington staff. And soon, Dick became Mr. Mondale's chief of staff and one of his closest advisors. And among one of his many accomplishments, Dick continued to show prescient political insight by hiring a bright-eyed young Minnesotan named Amy Klobuchar to be an intern for Walter Mondale. Now, Amy will be here to tell you the rest of the story. I think it's fair to say that Dick loved the Senate, and he believed strongly in the power of this institution to do good in people's lives. He understood that politics is about making the very most of the power that you have for good. One of my favorite stories comes from 1976, when Jimmy Carter was considering Walter Mondale to be vice president. So Fritz balked at the idea at first. He had heard some of the horror stories about how LBJ treated his friend Hubert Humphrey, and he was very negative to the idea of the vice presidency. But Dick encouraged Mondale to keep an open mind, and then he invited Humphrey over to the Senate to talk the whole idea through. And Humphrey was really clear. He said, "Fritz, you'll get more done up there in 2 days than you'll get done here in 2 years." And so Fritz and Joan and Dick, as I understand it, went down to Plains, Georgia to meet the Carters. Now, Fritz always said that Joan charmed the Carters and that sealed the deal. And I am sure that there is a lot of truth to that. But after that meeting, Dick told Mr. Mondale that he needed to write down on paper what he wanted the job of vice president to be. And so the two of them talked, and then Dick drafted a memo that laid out the template for the modern vice presidency. After the election, they presented their ideas to President-elect Carter, and Carter agreed. And that job, that memo, turned what had been a torture to Hubert Humphrey, was reimagined by Walter Mondale and Jimmy Carter, thanks to Dick Moe. Vice President Mondale had an office in the West Wing because they understood that proximity to the Oval and to decision-making was essential. Mondale got the information and the security briefings and the respect that allowed him to truly be a true advisor and trusted confidant to the president, not just a ribbon cutter and somebody who was designated to go to funerals. And Richard Moe became chief of staff to the vice president and senior advisor to President Carter. Many years later, Madam President, when Governor Mark Dayton asked me to be his lieutenant governor, I consulted my friend Walter Mondale. Did he think this was a good idea? And characteristically, Mondale was a little skeptical at first. But then he called me down to his office, and he had a mission in mind. I came in, and I sat down, and Mondale shouted out to Linda, his longtime personal assistant. He said, "Linda, get me Dick's memo." So he handed me Dick Moe's 11-page revolutionary tract on how to change the role of the second in command. "Take a look at this," says Mondale in his understated way. "I think it might give you a few ideas." So I used that memo to write my own memo to Governor Dayton so together that we were able to transform that role of lieutenant governor in Minnesota. And I remember saying to Mark, "You're no Jimmy Carter, and I am no Walter Mondale, but I think there are some good things for us to take to heart here." And that changed my life. I love this story because at its heart, I was a chief of staff and Dick was a staffer. And as a former staff, I appreciate great staff. And he was the consummate staffer, Dick Moe. But what happens next in his story is how Dick left behind the role of advisor and became a principal in his own right. When the Carter-Mondale ticket lost badly, in 1980, Dick regrouped. He practiced law for a while, and he dedicated himself to his love of American history. And he wrote a book called The Last Full Measure about Minnesota's famous 1st Regiment in the Battle of Gettysburg. And this led him to leading the National Trust for Historic Preservation, where he served as president for 17 years. In that role, he had a significant hand in preserving some of our country's most precious buildings and historic sites, and shaping how cities and small towns preserve the unique main streets and downtowns that give these communities a sense of place. His book, Changing Places, changed how downtowns were imagined, and he called out how big box stores were destroying what's precious and unique about these communities that we love. He marshaled famous historians and grassroots organizers to protect the Manassas battlefield from being overrun by a Disney theme park. And he was one of the first people to go to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina to highlight the need to restore the historically Black neighborhoods decimated by the storms. And his fondest achievement was the restoration of a Gothic revival home that President Lincoln used as a refuge for his family during the hot Washington summers of the Civil War. You can all visit President Lincoln's cottage in Washington, D.C., thanks to Dick. And in fact, Madam President, I believe we had a women's, and Senator Klobuchar, I believe we had a women's Senate dinner there ourselves and enjoyed that beautiful place that Dick protected and restored for all of us. So when I came to the Senate in 2018, Dick reached out to me immediately, and he became a trusted advisor to yet another Minnesota senator. He gave me wise counsel and in so many ways helped me to learn how to be a senator, but maybe most especially around the importance of protecting Minnesota's Boundary Waters wilderness area. The Boundary Waters is one of the great places on this planet. It is 1 million acres of lakes and bogs and forests and streams. And as Vice President Mondale's chief of staff in the Senate, Dick helped, when they were in the presidency, Dick helped Mondale and President Carter shepherd through Congress the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Act of 1978. This was the culmination of years of grassroots efforts to protect this place. And after all these years, Dick was still engaged in protecting the Boundary Waters from copper, nickel, sulfide mining. Dick understood the North Country of Minnesota. It was in his history, it was in his blood, and he understood the power of leadership to protect this special place. And I can tell you, Madam President, he was relentless. I remember once I took a call from him on New Year's Day morning. I was still in bed, and he's calling me on New Year's Day, starting a new year, Tina, it's time for us to think about what you can do to help to protect the Boundary Waters. Leadership, he said, makes a big difference. And he was right. Dick loved Minnesota, he loved this country, and he believed passionately in the idea that the United States Senate has the power to do good. He was steadfast in believing that individual leaders have an obligation to do their best and be their best and live up to our highest values. I mean, I could see him sitting across from me in the Senate dining room. There we were, the elder statesman and the junior senator, and he would lean in and say to me, "Tina, I've been thinking about something that I think you could do that would make a big difference. Let me tell you about it." Even as Parkinson's took its toll, and it did, he kept at it. One of the last conversations I had with him was about a speech that he wanted me to give on Minnesota's values of civic participation and our collective responsibility to work together for the good of all of us. And after the tragic and wrenching murders of Melissa Hortman and Mark, her husband, and the shooting of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, Yvette, Dick could still see the through line of our Minnesota story. From Minnesota's 1st Regiment sacrificing everything at Gettysburg, to Humphrey and Mondale, through civil rights and farmers and laborers to this moment. For Dick, this was the story of regular people called on to do the hard work of holding our democracy together, not out of partisanship, but in the spirit of building a more perfect union. So I have yet to deliver the speech that Dick had in mind, but I am working on it. And I am missing the inspiration of my friend and mentor, Dick Moe. We all should have someone like Dick's in our corners, someone wise, kind, telling us what we need to hear and pushing us to do better and do more for the good of all of us. Dick is loved and missed by his wife of 60 years, Julia Niemeyer Moe, by his daughter, Alexandra, and son, Andrew, his sister, Elizabeth, his 2 granddaughters, and many, many other family and friends, and those whose life he expanded by being a part of it. May his memory be a blessing to all of us who knew and loved him. Thank you, Madam President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I first want to thank my colleague and friend, Senator Smith, for her beautiful remarks and for her friendship with Dick to the end. And I'm sure you hear his voice all the time when you're trying to make decisions, and having that kind of person that's so grounded, not just in Minnesota, but in these values that he brought with him to Washington and that he brought with him to the Vice President's office couldn't be more important. So Dick, and especially at a time like this, I just kept thinking as Senator Smith spoke about how Dick cherished history instead of trampling it like we've seen some of right now. He understood that you can learn from history and that history can teach you lessons that help guide you when you have to make decisions in the now. So as Senator Smith mentioned, Dick was born in Duluth, not actually far away from where my dad grew up in Ely. So there was a lot of good stock up there. He was the son of Russell and Virginia Moe, and he grew up surrounded by the values that define our state: hard work and service to others, and especially northern Minnesota. So he then goes on to the University of Minnesota and gets his start in a big way by running the Democratic Farmer Labor Party and helped to lead that party to victory time and time again. Because like I said, he was grounded in doing the right thing, but he also was a mastermind of how to win elections and how to follow up for people and get things done. That's the path that led him to my mentor, Walter Mondale, who we all miss very, very much. I literally got to see Mondale at his highest peaks when he was vice president, and I was an intern in the office hired by Dick when he was chief of staff. And then I got to see him back in Minnesota, where he would literally was working at the law firm with me, and I saw him in grocery lines where he would engage in long discussions with the clerk at the grocery station on how we could get, say, peace in the Middle East or what we should be doing about an economic crisis. And Mondale had that same thing that drew Dick Moe to him, and that was a grounding in the people that you represent. So we all know what a great job he did running that office, his Norwegian sense of humor. I know those words don't always go together, but it was a very dry sense of humor and just this belief in decency. So Senator Smith recounted how Dick helped Fritz prepare for that meeting with Jimmy Carter. And I had one interesting perspective on how prepared Walter Mondale was for that meeting when I actually went to Plains a few years back and met with President Carter and Mrs. Carter. And what they told me over the pimento and cheese sandwiches that the former First Lady made was that it was Walter Mondale that knew that her name was pronounced Rosalind and not Rosalind. And I have a very strong feeling that Dick Moe drilled that into Mondale's head when he down there. And Carter actually said that really stood out because a bunch of the candidates mispronounced his wife's name. Among other things, as Tina explained, this was a model that they, after getting elected, embarked on. And Dick Moe became Vice President Mondale's chief of staff. He crafted that 11-page memo that redefined the vice presidency, giving it active role in shaping policy. And he also served on President Carter's senior staff, which was very unique. That's when I got to be an intern at that time, and I still remember writing in, sending in my letter, and interviewing over the phone. I have this cherished picture in the vice president's their home backyard that Dick Moe is in with all the interns, which included me and Tom Knives, who went on to be our ambassador to Israel. It was quite an intern class. And he was there. I remember it was the first time I ever had lobster, so it's very memorable to me. And I was so eager when I got there to do these policy memos that I had talked to Dick about and write all these very smart ideas for them. And they, in fact, assigned me to do the furniture inventory of every piece of furniture in the vice president's office and write down the numbers on a spreadsheet and make sure that they were all there and turn it into some government office. And I literally crawled around on the floor for 2 weeks checking serial numbers on desks and chairs. And so the first thing I learned from all that is that Walter Mondale and his chief of staff, Dick Moe, were scrupulously honest and nothing was missing. And second was to take every job seriously. And I often share that with young people, including the interns in the Capitol. That internship that Dick Moe hired me for was my first government job in Washington, D.C., and this was my second. So I remind them, take those internships and the people you work with and the relationships, even if they're fleeting, that you form in the meeting people and getting to know them, because they are oftentimes the key to your future, and never complain about what assignments that you get. So Dick Moe believed in preparing the next generation of public servants. I think Senator Smith's story of that just really says it all. Even in his later years, when he's not feeling as good, he takes that time to be such a mentor to her. So we talked about the longest serving president for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, 17-year tenure, led the efforts to rebuild so many historic neighborhoods in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, working on restoring President Lincoln's cottage, which is just an amazing thing to think that it had not been restored, but Dick Moe knew how important that was. I don't think he saw preservation as nostalgia. I think he saw it as honoring our country and honoring the Americans that had served. And that was a lot about that book, The Last Full Measure, that I just love. And it is now recognized as the definitive history of the 1st Minnesota Regiment, which, as we know, fought for the Union in the Civil War before Minnesota was even a state. And there had been another book, the historical novel, The Killer Angels, which, okay, won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 1975, but Dick felt it did not correctly account for the bravery of the Minnesotans in the 1st Minnesota, and he more than righted that wrong. So that story that I have often quoted around our state about the 262-member 1st Minnesota Regiment, which held the line against 1,600 Confederate troops while desperately needed reinforcements were brought in on the Union side, is truly worthy of the book that Dick wrote. I went with a number of senators, including Senator King and a number of Republican senators, to take a one-day deep dive on the Gettysburg battlefield site one day. And it was led by the head of the War College and another veteran member of that war college. And we went to that site. We first talked about Maine and the historic story of Maine, and then we went to the Minnesota site, which is a very big monument, but it's not nearly as much visited. And the head of the war college at the time actually started to shed a tear when he told the story, because he said, as Dick knew, the story of the first Minnesota was the story like no other. They asked them to hold the line, 262 men. 200, and they didn't pause. They went and did it, and we saw that open field, and they did it. 215 of them were struck down by bullets, an 82% casualty rate, the highest percentage of casualty suffered by any Union regiment in a single engagement in the entire war. That sacrifice, which Dick researched and captured, is summed up by a Churchill quote: "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." Those ragtag soldiers that didn't even have proper uniforms, that were farmers, that were laborers, that were part of a regiment from a state that wasn't even yet a state, stood up when it couldn't be more of a difficult burden, and they didn't hesitate, and they did their jobs. That's what Dick honored with that story. And it's something I think we all should be thinking about right now. What is truly sacrifice? What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to stand up for your country? So to Dick's wife, Julia, and his kids, Alexandra and Andrew, the granddaughters, we send our love and gratitude. Our state is so much better, and our country is so much better because of Dick Moe. He showed us, and clearly Senator Smith, that public service is worth it, that this devotion to history is not just some ancient thing in a dusty book, it matters to now. He showed us that the ties that bind us, whether it's small towns and historic preservation of buildings like Lincoln's Cottage, mean something in the now, that history matters. And I think we all need to remember that today. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Iowa.
Mr. President, it's day 23 of the Schumer shutdown, making this the second longest shutdown in modern history. While Senator Schumer says, quote, "Every day gets better for Democrats," the stunt is taking a real toll on Americans. Closing the government may be a game for Washington politicians, but it's not fun for the folks in Iowa who work hard and expect Congress to do the same. A social service provider in Sioux City is facing challenges providing shelter for the homeless because the Social Security Administration is closed. The wife of a civilian employee at the Rock Island Arsenal worries that if he doesn't get paid, the family may have to dip into their daughter's college funds to make ends meet. Another frustrated constituent in Council Bluffs says, "We have families here living paycheck to paycheck. They cannot afford food, much less health care." An employee of the Farm Service Agency in Taylor County, which is a neighboring county to my county, Montgomery, in rural southwest Iowa, says the shutdown is putting a strain on beginning farmers, as well as the elderly producers in her community. And the closure of USDA service centers is financially impacting farmers, which will have ripple effects on everyone for months to come. Thousands of families in Iowa are already facing the real possibility of not being able to put food on the table. Recipients of SNAP will not receive benefits next month, and WIC, Women, Infants, and Children's support for mothers and babies, will also run out very soon. And Iowans aren't alone in this. If Democrats do not allow the government to reopen, half of our states will run out of money to provide SNAP benefits in November. That means millions of children across the country will have food taken away from them by the Schumer shutdown. This is a particularly cruel way to make a political point, especially at Thanksgiving time. So most folks here in this body really understand that there are a lot of families that mean a lot to me. Not only my families in Iowa, but then also all of our military families across the United States. So my daughter and my son-in-law serve on active duty Army. My daughter and I talk just about every day, either by FaceTime or by phone. And the shutdown is really impacting her younger soldiers. So every day, my daughter and I go through those discussions of where will the soldiers find food? Her discussion with me today centered around a talk she had with their military chaplain yesterday. She was typing up a letter so that her soldiers could receive gift cards before Thanksgiving from the chaplain's funds. But unfortunately, the chaplain said, I don't even know that we will have funds so that we can get the gift cards for the families because of the shutdown. One of the military units has actually started its own internal food bank so that soldiers can go to that food bank and get food for their families. Anyone that has served in the military or knows someone that serves in the military understands that already our military men and women, many of them qualify for SNAP, even though they're employed by the military. These are families that are currently serving every single day with the inability to get paid. Now, thankfully, the president was able to scratch together dollars from the Department of Defense to pay them their first check. But this is a long-term problem we're facing now. And the president won't be able to keep doing that. So we have all of our federal employees, our military men and women that are not getting paid. They can't literally put food on the table. One of my daughter's soldiers has had to drop out of college. This NCO works full-time during the day and tries to do better by going to college at night. And she can't afford to pay the tuition now that's required, and there are no appropriated funds to move forward with her college. And so she had to pull her enrollment yesterday. So we're impacting families in all of our home states. We're impacting the men and women that are defending our nation. This standoff is a fight for survival. But what I'm doing here, I'm fighting for the folks who are continuing to work hard every single day without a paycheck or going without the help they need just simply to get by. But the Democrats are fighting for their own political survival. We witnessed here on this very floor earlier today, the majority of Democrats vote no on paying these essential workers in the federal government. Air traffic controllers, our military men and women, the Capitol policemen that protect this complex, the staff that we see here sitting today. They voted no. One Democrat senator candidly confided to the Hill newspaper that if Democrats vote to reopen the government, quote, people are going to get hammered by their liberal base. Another admits there are enough Democrats who would vote to reopen the government, quote, if people were not terrified of getting the guillotine. Apparently, the socialist uprising within the Democrat Party is turning into a modern-day French Revolution, folks, and playing the role of Marie Antoinette, proclaiming, "Let them eat cake," is Senator Schumer. The truth is, Democrats are literally, I mean literally, taking food out of the mouths of babes to save themselves from their own unhinged voters. Instead of bending to the loudmouth liberal lunatics and socialist sociopaths who make up their base, Democrats should listen to their colleague, Senator Fetterman of Pennsylvania. Senator Fetterman called the shutdown, quote, bad political theater, adding, quote, there are no winners here. It's not getting better every day here. People are going to start to get really hungry, end quote. He's absolutely right, folks. And the Democrats know it's causing pain. In fact, that's the whole point of this exercise. Congresswoman Catherine Clark, the second in line in the House Democratic leadership, said the quiet part out loud, stating, quote, families are going to suffer because of the shutdown. She calls that suffering, quote, leverage. Leverage. The American people and their suffering babies are leverage. Using the suffering of the very people we were elected to serve as political leverage is just plain sick. Mr. President, perhaps Republicans need to start using our own leverage, the Senate schedule. If Chuck Schumer cancels Thanksgiving for millions of families across America who can't feed their children, the holiday should be canceled for the Senate as well. We should all be prepared to stay here until we reopen the government, so no child will go to bed hungry because of Schumer's shutdown shenanigans. This is a serious job, folks. We need to take it seriously, we need to act seriously, and we need to ensure the shutdown ends. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Iowa.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have 4 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Environment and Public Works be discharged and the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 2316.
The clerk will report.
HR 2316, an act to amend the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration Act to provide that interest on obligations held in the Federal Aid to Wildlife Restoration Fund shall become available for apportionment at the beginning of fiscal year 2033.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 110 S259.
Clerk will report.
Calendar number 110 S259, a bill to direct the Federal Communications Commission to publish a list of entities that hold authorizations, licenses, or other grants of authority issued by the Commission and that have certain foreign ownership and for other purposes.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bill.
Is there further debate? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 35 S99.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 35 S99, a bill to require the Secretary of Commerce to produce a report that provides recommendations to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, and impact of Department of Commerce programs related to supply chain resilience and manufacturing and industrial innovation, and for other purposes.
Is there an objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate now proceed to the en bloc consideration of the following resolutions, which are at the desk. S Resolution 464, S Resolution 465.
Is there an objection to proceeding en bloc? Without objection, the Senate will proceed en bloc.
I ask unanimous consent that the resolutions be agreed to, the preambles be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, all en bloc.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 3 p.m. on Monday, October 27th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and the Senate be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. Finally, at 5:30 p.m., the Senate execute the orders with respect to the Talbelson and Lewis nominations.
Without objection, so ordered.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order following the remarks of Senators Welch and Whitehouse.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, every single one of us, every member of the United States Senate, my fellow Vermonters, all Americans, people around the world are absolutely thrilled by the ceasefire in Gaza. After 2 years of relentless bombing, after 2 years of horror for the hostages and their families, the bombing has largely stopped and the hostages are home. This is extraordinary. And I salute everyone involved in getting us to this day, including President Trump. But let's be clear, there is more work to be done. The only way this ceasefire will succeed is if it is the beginning of a relentless, tireless process
that aims to get us to the two-state solution, 2 states for 2 peoples, a safe and democratic Jewish state of Israel, alongside a sovereign state for the Palestinians that are indigenous to the land where they now live, as envisioned in the President's 20-point plan and has been U.S. policy for over 50 years. So the question before us is, will all who are involved, particularly the United States government, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Palestinian Authority, U.S. partners in the Gulf and our European allies, will everyone do every single thing possible to make that success of a lasting peace through a 2-state solution a likelihood? And let me be candid, Mr. President. I am extremely alarmed at what we're already seeing since the ceasefire. On the Israeli side, Mr. Netanyahu is continuing to dial up or down the delivery of urgently needed food or medicine, depending on what his political desires of the moment are. And after 2 years of already having kept food out largely for starving kids, that has to be provided with the 600 trucks a day, unabated, continuously and regularly. And at the same time, Hamas is score settling, is committing public executions and intimidating the Palestinians who yearn for peace and a return to some degree of normalcy. The impediments to peace are deep and they are clear. So we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to make sure that the violence and the destruction does not resume? In Gaza, one thing is absolutely essential. Mr. Netanyahu must stop blocking the medicine and the food for starving kids and Palestinians. We cannot condone the Israeli military under the instructions of the Netanyahu government from illegally blocking international food aid from getting through Rafah. And yet we see a continuation of children facing severe malnutrition and hunger. We also see kids who are sick and had the promise of getting health care, cancer treatment, women who need maternity facilities, or basic medicines and treatments still not having access to them. The Netanyahu government cannot be allowed to once again turn on and off the supply of food and medicine and use it as a military tool. Withholding fruit and vegetables and other food from 1 million hungry kids is not a military response. It's a collective punishment. Next, Mr. Netanyahu must finally, once and for all, stop the bombing in Gaza. The IDF's own data shows that more than 5 out of 6 people killed by IDF bombs supplied by the U.S. over the past 2 years were civilian casualties. And those government bombings that have been renewed in Gaza this week, killing nearly 100 and injuring even more after 2 soldiers were killed in Rafah, has got to stop. These types of response bombings that were so frequent before the ceasefire, disproportionate and illegal by and large, are no more legal and as disproportionate when they're occurring after the ceasefire and jeopardize the stability and survivability of the ceasefire. So we should be calling on the Netanyahu government to reopen the medical evacuation corridor so that those Palestinian kids in Gaza with traumatic war wounds, bullets in their bodies and missing limbs can be evacuated to Palestinian church hospitals in Jerusalem. And the violence and settler attacks in the West Bank also represent an ominous threat to the ceasefire and a threat to fulfilling a true vision of peace. Gaza and the West Bank are part of what will be a separate Palestinian state. And that violence that it's occurring at the hands of settlers has to be stopped by the Netanyahu government. and Mr. President, just this week in the West Bank, we saw violent attacks by masked, club-wielding settlers on Palestinian villages and harvesters. They even attacked the very same village that our ambassador, Mike Huckabee, had visited and promised to protect only a few months before. This photograph, taken only a few days ago, is the result of an illegal Israeli settler beating a 55-year-old woman who is harvesting olives on her family's ancestral lands, beating her with that club without mercy, without restraint. Her name is Ufa Abu Aliua. She's a mother and she's a victim of violence. And this just happened days ago. By the way, October marks the start of the olive harvest season across the West Bank. And since the start of the harvest, where folks have to go from their homes to the fields, illegal Israeli settlers have reportedly staged 158 assaults against Palestinian farmers, and they've destroyed nearly 800 trees. And these trees, as you know, are nurtured over generations, just like the ones on the Mount of Olives. And many Palestinian families depend on them as their only source of income. The violence, by the way, also impacts Americans. And if Mr. Netanyahu is serious about working with the president and supporting the ceasefire that he did agree to, he'll take action to hold accountable those responsible for the Americans killed by Israeli forces and illegal settlers. Americans like Saif Musalat, a Florida teenager who was on vacation visiting family when he was attacked and he was killed by illegal settlers. And Mr. Netanyahu must also finally help the United States investigate the killing of the American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was shot by an Israeli sniper from a couple of hundred yards away, nowhere near any Israeli troops. A Palestinian state envisioned by the ceasefire requires that Mr. Netanyahu also end the constant expansion of settlements into the West Bank. The Israeli government must stop demolishing Palestinian homes, sometimes using bulldozers paid for by American taxpayers. And yet, the Netanyahu government is going full steam ahead. This is an immense impediment to peace. And to be certain, Hamas, too, must lay down its arms. It must refrain from violence. That is an incredible threat to the ceasefire. Ultimately, Hamas has got to go. Hamas violence is that threat to peace. It's a threat to the Palestinians living in Gaza who yearn for peace and yearn for an opportunity to rebuild where they live and have their kids be back in school and to be safe. The ceasefire acknowledges that there must be a force that has sufficient authority to quell Hamas violence. This is the peacekeeping force that was in the 20-point presidential plan. If we're going to be successful, we have to redouble our efforts to stand that force up and make certain that all the signatories to that peace plan do their part to make certain that that can happen. President Trump's leadership to help achieve a ceasefire, that leadership must be redoubled to achieve a durable peace and a lasting peace for the Israelis and the Palestinians. To have this stop on the day the agreement was signed, without then redoubling efforts to face the difficult challenges that await resolution after the ceasefire, will result in failure. So I call on the president, I urge all of us to do every single thing we can to stay focused on the implementation of the peace plan and not turn away as though this is yesterday's problem. because if we don't do that, it will be tomorrow's problem once again. Mr. President, I urge all of us to accept the burden of leadership that is absolutely required for the well-being of the entire region, but for the promise of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and for the promise of the Palestinian people living alongside in peace with Israeli neighbors. Mr. President, I yield back.
Senator from Connecticut, Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I rise here for the 302nd time to urge this somnolent, compromised body to wake up to the dangers of climate change, again with my trusty and increasingly battered chart. This time, my focus is on the fossil fuel industry's corrupting influence over the Trump administration and what that means for Americans. When I stood before you for the 296th time back in January, I predicted that the fossil fuel looters and polluters would take over the federal government. I am saddened but not surprised that my grim forecast has already come true. It's only October, and already it's clear that the fossil fuel industry bought, paid for, and now straight up owns the Trump administration. And it's only going to get worse. For years, I warned that if we let fossil fuel money pour into our politics unchecked, if we let dark money run rampant, and if we let polluters sabotage science, then one day the government would cease to belong to we the people, and instead belong to them, the polluters. Well, that day has arrived. Last month, I set out the fossil fuel industry's 4 phases of climate denial. Phase 1, bury the evidence. Refuse to disclose what they knew, what their own scientists were telling them. Phase 2, actively mislead the public when the evidence they had buried ultimately comes out. Phase 3, flood the political zone with dark money to buttress the climate denial fraud using unlimited funding unleashed by Citizens United. Now we're in phase 4, where an increasingly desperate fossil fuel operation switches from defense and blockade to attack. Today, I'll do a deep dive on phase 4, the corruption and weaponization of government phase, and how it is playing out across the corrupt Trump administration. Phase 4 is different. They're not just hiding or misleading. or politically obstructing any longer. In phase 4, the fossil fuel industry fully corrupts the entire executive branch and uses the power of government to go after and crush its clean energy competition. Behind this plot are the creepy billionaires who run the industry, out to get even richer at the expense of the American people. Let me be blunt. The Trump administration does not work for you, the American people. It works for fossil fuel billionaires and their sprawling dark money corruption machine, which, no coincidence, helped put Trump in office for a second time. Don't take my word about whom they work for. An official from the White House's own new so-called National Energy Dominance Council offered, and I quote here, concierge white glove service to help keep polluting coal plants open and mines in operation. That official, by the way, previously worked for Shell Oil and Valero Energy. Every agency, every decision, every policy of this corrupt administration is in the service of its fossil fuel donors and patrons. Fossil fuels looters and polluters are running the United States government for their own benefit from the inside. President Trump, EPA Administrator Zeldin, Energy Secretary Wright, Interior Secretary Burgum, the whole lot of them is bought and paid for. So settle in, and I'll walk you through it, from the offer and acceptance to the return on fossil fuels political investment to the costs to the American people. Let's start with the moment of sale. It was April 2024. Early April. Candidate Trump was desperate. His criminal trial would begin in 4 days, and his best shot at staying out of jail was winning the presidency. But the unpopular politicians, unpopular policies just weren't moving the needle. There was one thing left to do. It was time to make a deal. Cornered and starved for cash, Trump invited the fossil fuel donor elite to Mar-a-Lago. Sensing an opportunity, into those faux guilt halls strolled the oil barons, the gas tycoons, the petrochemical magnates, the pipeline moguls. If you'd struck oil or gas in America, you likely received an invitation. And by the way, they were a little desperate themselves because their business model was failing against the relentless pressure of cheaper, cleaner, more popular renewable energy. There, at his club, candidate Trump delivered his offer. It was not subtle. No think tank jargon or super PAC euphemisms, no speaking in code. He looked out at those assembled fossil fuel billionaires and made a simple pitch. Give me $1 billion and I will do anything and everything you want. The fossil fuel billionaires were only too happy to take that deal. Harold Hamm, the fracking kingpin, opened his checkbook. Jeffrey Hildebrand, the Texas oil man, poured in millions. Kelsey Warren, a pipeline magnate, joined. Other familiar players like George Bishop, Tim Dunn, the Wilkes brothers, they all lined up. The fossil fuel donor elite understood the corrupt bargain. Invest just $1 billion, and maybe not all of that $1 billion. They're at hundreds of millions, we're not sure. But let's say it was $1 billion that ended up coming through. $1 billion to preserve the annual $700+ billion subsidy that fossil fuels free to pollute business model relies on. $1 billion once for $700 billion a year. And on top of that, they could reap untold added billions in new tax subsidies, pollution deregulation, protection from legal accountability for misdeeds, and even a government-backed war they could run against their feared clean energy competition. This was not just a fundraiser. This was no boisterous campaign rally. This was a deal, a billion-dollar quid pro quo deal. This corrupt deal marked a turning point in American history. Before, fossil fuels influenced, using political dark money and dark money threats and promises. They lied, using a decades-long campaign of denial, deception, and doublespeak to hide the harmful effects of their products. Those two operations, the climate denial fraud operation and the dark money corruption operation, together had blocked any meaningful bipartisan climate legislation. They killed that dead. The instant Citizens United gave them that power. The 2024 elections gave the fossil fuel barons full control. Under the Trump regime, the United States government has acted exactly as you would expect a corrupted government to act. Every agency captured, climate and energy laws and regulations rewritten, all the inconvenient science ignored, silenced, or worse, erased completely. Say goodbye to government for we the people, and hello to government for them, the polluters. The entire Trump administration works for its fossil fuel donors. On January 2025, day one in office, President Trump issued industry-drafted executive orders designed to kneecap fossil fuels clean energy competition and prop up fossil fuel. One executive order even wrote wind energy and solar energy out of the definition of energy. These executive orders are now implemented by federal agencies that are in the hands of stooges of the big polluters. Let's start with the Environmental Protection Agency. There's so much rot over there, it's hard to know where to begin. So I'll start with personnel. Atop the agency is Lee Zeldin. You may know him as the erstwhile congressman from New York or the failed gubernatorial candidate. But did you know of his role as the errand boy for billionaire Trump donor and oil executive Tim Dunn? Until January, Zeldin had a cushy role at the America First Policy Institute, a pro-Trump so-called think tank founded by oil man Dunn. AFPI is hell-bent on increasing fossil fuel production, reducing fossil fuel regulation, and protecting the free-to-pollute fossil fuel business model. Dunn was thrilled to have his boy Zeldin slide slimily into EPA. Then there's EPA Deputy Administrator David Fatui and head of the Office of Air and Radiation Aaron Szabo, who before joining the EPA spent years defending polluting industries in court or making polluters pitches to us in Congress. Stephen Cook, Principal Deputy Assistant in the EPA's Office of Land and Emergency Management, recently represented the American fuel and petroleum manufacturers in its legal challenge to an EPA cleanup rule. Now he is the regulator he just fought in court. Nancy Beck, the Trump's EPA chemical safety advisor, used to help run the chemical manufacturers' main trade association, the American Chemistry Council. And Sean Donahue, well, he is the EPA's top lawyer, even though he has never taken a deposition, tried a case to verdict, argued a motion, or authored and signed a legal pleading. But his partner was Deputy Director of Personnel at the White House, and fossil fuel deregulation depends on usefully incompetent lawyers. The foxes are literally guarding the EPA henhouse. Once the pride of American environmental stewardship, the EPA is now turned inside out. Instead of writing rules to protect the public from pollution, it's writing rules to protect polluters from public accountability. EPA's most striking betrayal to date was its move to repeal the endangerment finding, the scientific and legal cornerstone that acknowledged greenhouse gases are a threat to public health and welfare. Without that finding, EPA would have no authority or obligation to regulate climate pollution, which is precisely the whole point. This is not about science. This is not about law. This is about doing the bidding of the polluting fossil fuel industry, which doesn't want to be regulated and which must pollute for free to survive. Never mind the enormous cost and harm that dumps onto American families. To justify its proposed repeal of the endangerment finding, EPA leaned on a junk Department of Energy so-called climate report, a cooked-up document so baseless that more than 85 real climate scientists issued a comprehensive rebuttal of it as fundamentally flawed, biased, full of errors, and not fit to inform policymaking. A quote there. The American Meteorological Society condemned it as misleading and dangerous. Of course, the so-called climate report was not science. It was propaganda, fossil fuel propaganda. With 99% consensus in peer-reviewed scientific literature that fossil fuel emissions are dangerously changing our climate, you would be hard-pressed to find 5 climate scientists who would downplay or deny climate change. Trump's corrupt Department of Energy found all 5. They weren't hard to find, though, because they all worked for fossil fuel front groups. They were chosen precisely because they would deny established science. Get a load of this crew. Dr. Roy Spencer, previously a visiting fellow at the climate denialist Heritage Foundation, funded, no surprise, by ExxonMobil, Donors Trust, the Koch Foundations, and the Sarah Scaife Foundation, all fossil fuel companies or dark money outfits pushing fossil fuels pollute for free agenda. Dr. John Christie, linked to conservative front group Competitive Enterprise Institute, funded with dark money from the American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers, the Charles Koch Institute, Donors Trust, the Heritage Foundation, Marathon Petroleum, and Murray Energy. Dr. Judith Curry, who charges $400 per hour for consulting services to petroleum companies, electric utilities, and natural gas energy traders. A frequent face also here in Congress, spewing fossil fuel-funded propaganda in committee hearings. Dr. Stephen Coonan, formerly at British Petroleum, now a fellow at the Hoover Institute, a conservative-leaning research organization funded by ExxonMobil, Donors Trust, and the Sarah Scaife Foundation. Finally, Dr. Ross McKittrick of the Cato Institute, funded by Charles Koch, Donors Trust, ExxonMobil, Murray Energy, and the Scaife Family Foundations. And he's also a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute, funded by the Charles G. Koch Foundation, ExxonMobil, and the Sarah Scaife Foundation. If you're sensing a pattern, you should be. Everyone knew the report was nonsense, but it gave the polluters a fig leaf behind which EPA could try to deregulate fossil fuel pollution. No surprise, the group of climate deniers was disbanded before they had to answer to the public under the Administrative Procedures Act for their junk report. Trump's corrupt EPA is also repealing methane standards, undoing auto emissions rules, abandoning air pollution safeguards, scrapping limits on toxic emissions, cutting protections against pollution from coal plants like mercury and carbon dioxide, even clawing back billions in appropriated funding for clean energy. Hell, EPA literally provided polluters with a special email address to get exemptions from air toxics rules. Concierge service indeed. Trump's EPA had to really bend the rules to roll back state safeguards like California's Clean Air Act waiver, created a half-century ago in recognition of California's then immense air pollution challenges and its early leadership in improving air quality. Waivers allow California and other states like Rhode Island that follow California's lead to set tougher pollution standards for cars and trucks sold inside their borders. But tougher pollution standards mean selling less gasoline, and so they went at the California waiver. There was a trick here. Trump's EPA submitted California's waivers to Congress as so-called final rules, which they weren't and which had never been done before. But it made them vulnerable to undoing by simple Senate majority here under the Congressional Review Act, a trick, by the way, suggested by fossil fuel industry lawyers in the polluter page of the Wall Street Journal. Well, GAO and the Senate parliamentarian rejected the effort to falsely label the waivers as rules. So our fossil fuel-funded Republican friends went nuclear, overruled the Senate parliamentarian, and killed the state waivers. A sour joke from a party that in other circumstances claims to be all about states' rights, states' ability to self-govern, and cooperative federalism. Thanks to the corrupt billion-dollar deal, the Environmental Protection Agency is now clearly the polluter protection agency, bought and paid for. Goodbye again to we the people. Hello to them, the polluters. Let's talk about the Trump Justice Department, perhaps better called Oil, Gas, and Coal LLP. You can't understand the corruption at EPA without understanding how Trump weaponized the Justice Department to become the fossil fuel industry's taxpayer-funded law firm. One example, from the get-go, EPA Administrator Zeldin was hell-bent on clawing back more than $20 billion in clean energy grants Congress had appropriated. But he had a problem. There was no legal basis to do so. Enter Trump's corrupted DOJ, which tried to cook up a fake criminal investigation to provide a pretext to freeze the funds. Zeldin echoed the theme with multiple phony and likely defamatory allegations of criminal and fraudulent behavior by grant recipients, who, by the way, included among them nefarious organizations like Habitat for Humanity. Well, next problem. The evidence was so weak that the chief of the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office Criminal Division resigned rather than authorize the fake criminal investigation. And no other career attorney in the whole office would sign on. So, Trump's since fired interim U.S. attorney personally submitted a warrant application with no career cosigner. And guess what? He got shot down by the magistrate judge for lack of probable cause. Any federal prosecutor can tell you how unusual and how embarrassing that is. Desperate, Trump's DOJ tried to shop the same failed investigation to other U.S. attorneys' offices, hoping somebody, anybody, would pursue the failed warrant. And in case that weren't enough, meanwhile, in another courtroom, back in the same D.C. courthouse, Department of Justice lawyers in a civil matter were denying that they alleged fraud in the use of those funds. What a mess. Seeking warrants without proof, prompting career officials to resign, making fake public assertions of criminality, failing in court, making inconsistent legal arguments in the same courthouse, all of that to claw back money duly appropriated by Congress and properly obligated to grantees, all to help grow the clean energy sector and reduce air pollution? None of that is normal DOJ. This is weaponized DOJ. Just last month, DOJ's fossil fuels law firm went to federal court in New York to strike down a state law requiring the largest fossil fuel polluters to pay into a fund to redress New York's climate damages for infrastructure, adaptation, for disaster recovery. DOJ, the United States Department of Justice, went to court to argue the polluter's case, that the law was an unconstitutional overreach that federal courts should rein in. The Justice Department of the United States, paid for by U.S. taxpayers, used its resources to give a taxpayer freebie to the likes of ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, Shell, and Koch Industries, companies with plentiful armies of lawyers of their own. Trump's corrupted DOJ also sued Vermont to strike down a similar state law, and even sued Hawaii and Michigan to stop those states from suing fossil fuel companies before the state's complaints had even hit the docket. This is not normal DOJ. This is weaponized DOJ. Why is DOJ acting so strangely? As a former prosecutor, I'm telling you, this makes no sense unless you follow the money. After the billion-dollar quid pro quo deal, DOJ has become the polluter's taxpayer-funded law firm. Goodbye to we the people as the DOJ client. Hello to the new client, them the polluters. Third is Trump's Department of Energy. It's run by Chris Wright, the former CEO of an oil and gas services company, handpicked to lead DOE by, guess who? Oil billionaire Harold Hamm, who organized the Mar-a-Lago billion-dollar deal donor dinner. DOE should be advancing clean energy, supporting energy innovation, and funding the energy technologies of tomorrow, as Congress has authorized it to do. Instead, this Department of Energy has become a fossil fuel industry lackey. You've got to recognize, in looking at what is going on over there, that Trump's executive orders, supposedly to unleash American energy, are written in code. It's not a complicated code. In the code, the word energy is code for fossil fuel. Understand that, and the rest becomes obvious. And look at the behavior. Department of Energy cut clean energy grants for low-carbon technologies and for reducing emissions. Department of Energy slashed funding for solar energy by 87% and wind energy by 78%. Department of Energy created a $625 million bailout fund for expensive, polluting coal-fired power plants. During the current shutdown, Trumpsters are piling on for fossil fuel polluters, so far scrapping $7.56 billion in clean energy grants. All of them, I'm sure, by coincidence, in 16 states where Kamala Harris won the presidential election. All of this will raise costs for people. DOE knows how grids work. They know that suppressing clean energy means that the grid has to call up expensive, polluting fossil fuel plants, plants that might otherwise be idle because they're too expensive to run. They know that this moves billions from utility customers' pockets to the pockets of the fossil fuel industry. This is not a glitch. This is the goal. Oh, and don't forget that it was DOE that cooked up the junk science report and teed up EPA to ditch its duty to regulate fossil fuel emissions. Thanks to the billion-dollar deal, Trump's corrupted Department of Energy is, by its own coded definition, not the Department of Energy, it's the Department of Fossil Fuel. Again, goodbye to we the people, hello to them the polluters. Next is the Department of Interior, once a steward of America's public land and waters. The billion-dollar deal turned it into a leasing agent for fossil fuel. Trump's Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, another cabinet member selected by Big Oil's Harold Hamm, is busy as he tries to crush offshore wind, expanding offshore drilling, opening vast stretches of the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska's Cook Inlet to his oil and gas industry clientele. Onshore, he's handing out leases across the West. Never mind the effects these projects will have on the climate, on water resources, or on nearby communities. Trump's Interior is even lowering royalty fees and environmental standards to make sure drillers get maximum profit at minimum responsibility. Lowering royalty fees, which are already lower than what most private landowners charge, obviously takes money directly from taxpayers and hands it to oil and gas barons, looting and polluting. At the same time, Trump's out to assassinate clean, reliable wind energy. In New York, Interior halted work on a fully permitted, under construction, 810-megawatt offshore wind farm on justification so dubious they're almost entirely redacted out of FOIA'd documents. Off Rhode Island and Connecticut, Someone at Moscow Central told Interior to slap a stop work order on Revolution Wind when it was nearly finished. Get this. Government lawyers had to go into court and make arguments exactly opposite to arguments they had made defending the same project in the same courthouse just weeks before. No surprise, the fake stop work order cratered in court, but those corrupt shenanigans cost the project at least $60 million. Here, it's not just blue states. Out west in Idaho, Interior reversed approval of Lava Ridge, a 1,000-megawatt wind project that suddenly had legal deficiencies. Why would the federal government sabotage clean energy projects on their way to completion? Follow the money. It goes to fossil fuel donors. Every electron from clean energy that gets delayed is an electron that gas and coal barons get to burn fossil fuel to sell. And since wind and solar energy are actually cheaper, your utility bills go up. It's a direct transfer of cash from American families to fossil fuel companies and their billionaire owners. Interior has even started to auction off wildlife refuges, treasured places that should be sanctuaries for threatened species. Oil and gas companies are now invited to bid on land set aside for conservation. National parks face budget cuts, lost protections, and industrial projects right at their borders. Trump's corrupt interior is no longer about preserving these landscapes for future generations, but about what can be extracted from them now by big donors. The public loses cherished lands and protections that took decades to establish, all for a short-term fossil fuel payday. Interior ignores tribal consultation, pressing forward with drilling projects on ancestral lands without meaningful dialogue or consent. Tribal governments and Native communities, just obstacles to be brushed aside rather than sovereign partners with legal rights. This behavior echoes a long, shameful history of disregard for indigenous voices when fossil fuel profits are at stake. This is no all-of-the-above energy strategy, as the administration claims. It is a fossil fuel-first strategy that kneecaps clean power while supercharging oil and gas. The Interior Department is now basically the auctioneer for oil and gas leases. Public lands are no longer treasures for the people, they are commodities for the polluters. So again, goodbye government for we the people, hello government for them, the polluters. Last, we have the State Department. Under visionary leaders like John Kerry, the State Department once led America's global engagement on climate, helping secure the landmark Paris Agreement and accomplishing impressive and enormous international oceans protections from the climate threat. Now, with Trump calling the shots and Marco Rubio dutifully implementing his whims, the U.S. has exited the Paris Agreement and impedes cooperation on climate action. Just last week, using unprecedented tactics, the Trump administration bullied the International Maritime Organization into delaying a carbon-based levy for shipping emissions. Just so you can put this in context, shipping is responsible for more global carbon pollution than all but 5 countries, and it's completely unregulated. Shipping emissions degrade air quality around ports like Los Angeles, meaning millions of people breathe dirty air. There are clean alternatives to maritime fossil fuels. The technologies are ready, and the shipping industry wanted to make this transition. Plus, there's almost no cost to consumers. There's almost no American ship involved. But the Trump administration wouldn't have it, because every ship that runs on green ammonia or some other pollution-free fuel means one fewer ship that runs on bunker oil or LNG. And that means less money into the pockets of Trump's fossil fuel donors. Plus, it was a threat. It was a threat to the free-to-pollute business model that fossil fuel wrongfully depends on. So, we'll find out more about this, but with truly unprecedented tactics, the corrupt Trumpsters went full Al Capone, or maybe it should be called Oil Capone, to crush it. I should add that when I said last we have the State Department, that wasn't completely accurate, because Trump has put the whole of government in the service of his fossil fuel donors, not just the cabinet agencies. I'll just give one example: the Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps has a long and proud history, with a primary role to build and maintain flood control and safety infrastructure, levees, seawalls, and the like. The Army Corps also has a role in permitting energy projects. And last month, it announced that it would prioritize projects that are energy dense. Energy dense. In other words, those that generate a large amount of power on a relatively small footprint of land. Energy dense is a made-up thing. It is a fake concept, reverse engineered from the result that they want to achieve through it, to favor supposedly energy-dense fossil fuel projects over wind and solar farms that are more spread out. Except it's fake. Energy density, if it were real, would count the spread of pollution from fossil fuel plants, like soot particulates that can travel hundreds of miles, or greenhouse gases causing global harm. If it were real, it would count the huge supply footprint these fossil fuel plants require to run, the mining and drilling for coal and oil and gas, and all the related environmental destruction, the trucks, railroads, and pipelines spewing and leaking that deliver the fuels. In real life, the wind and sunshine that power renewable power plants have no footprint at all. The real-life footprint of fossil plants, it's far larger than renewable plants. Yet, in fake, corrupted Trump world, fossil fuel plants will get their permits expedited while the corrupt Trump administration stalls renewable facilities over made-up energy density. Seriously, does energy density sound like a policy based in reason, or is it based on campaign cash? So that's a quick tour of the fossil fuel industry's deep corruption of the Trump administration, of its oily tentacles sliding slimily into federal agencies that should be working for the American people. But this is also a story about who picks up the bill, who pays when government is corrupted. Spoiler alert, it's you, the regular, hardworking American public. Bad enough that the billion-dollar deal allowed our government to be bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry. Add on that every favor and freebie given to the fossil fuel industry costs the American people. Let's start with disaster costs. Extreme natural disasters cost Americans between $99 and $126 billion in the first half of this year alone. NOAA's database of billion-dollar disasters shows the line going up and up and up. Storm after storm, flood after flood, fire after fire. So, the Trump administration wants to end that database, as if silencing the burglar alarm will make the burglary end. Each disaster means billions in federal aid, billions in rebuilding costs, billions in uncompensated harm to Americans, billions that taxpayers and homeowners have to pay or suffer because polluters pollute for free. Increasing disaster costs bring something along with them: increasing homeowners' insurance problems. Problems both in affordability and availability. Premiums are soaring far faster than the rate of inflation. In Florida, the average premium is $14,000 per year and climbing. In Louisiana, already $11,000 per year. Insurance companies are leaving or abandoning customers, with non-renewals to homeowners doubling or worse in many states over the last 6 years. If Americans can't get homeowners insurance, then their property can't get a mortgage. And that spells trouble for property values in climate-exposed communities across the country. About 6 months ago, the Fed chair, Jay Powell, testified in the Senate that within 10 to 15 years, there would be whole regions of the United States where mortgages were no longer available. That's not coming from a green group, that's coming from the Fed. And it hits home. Families dropped from coverage are left in uninsurable homes that they might have worked a lifetime to buy, whose value plummets when mortgages can't be had. This is all fine fun and games if you're a Palm Beach billionaire selling your mansion all cash to another billionaire. But in real life, it's devastating for hardworking people, say a tradesperson living near Orlando, trying to sell their family's biggest single investment. They bought that home with a mortgage. They need to sell it to someone who can get a mortgage if they're going to get their price. With no mortgage, the price crashes. This is a cascade. It starts with fossil fuel emissions, which amp up climate risk, creating an insurance crisis, making properties unmortgageable, crashing homeowners' property values, and cascading into full-on economic recession. The warnings of this abound. And if fossil fuel weren't so powerful in this building, they'd be listened to. Your premiums go up, or your coverage disappears, and your home value plummets. And what does the Trump administration have to say about this? Well, they're not listening to you. They're lying to you because they're so deep in the pockets of the polluters who caused it all. Energy bills. Energy bills are getting out of hand. Several things drive this. First, we subsidize fossil fuel, locking in fossil dependence, so consumers get roasted whenever the international oil cartel jacks up global commodity prices, which we see them do all the time. Second, U.S. consumers pay more when the fossil fuel industry decides to export oil and gas for higher prices overseas. And there's less domestic supply because it got exported, and when there's less domestic supply, that predictably raises prices. The Trump administration forcing utilities to run aging and expensive coal and gas plants that were slated for retirement will likely add $3 billion per year to your electricity bills. $3 billion. But your added cost is fossil fuels' added revenue. You're the one getting cheated. The biggest hit will come from Trump sabotaging clean energy technologies. Technologies that already produce electricity at lower cost. Here's how it works. When less expensive clean energy can't get on the grid, expensive polluting fossil fuel plants that would otherwise be idle as too expensive to run get called up instead. Those more expensive plants then set the price for the grid, and your costs go up. The trick is that the fossil interests that own and fuel those cost-setting plants get an enormous payday. With clean energy on the grid, their revenue can drop to zero because that plant is too expensive to run. But you back out the cheaper clean energy, or you don't let new clean energy on the grid, and suddenly that plant roars back to polluting life. And the money flows to the plant owner, and the money flows to the fossil fuel dealers that bring the fuel to the plant. It is a direct transfer from ratepayers' pockets to fossil fuel barons. And they're hoping you won't figure that out, that you'll blame it on the electric utility and not notice how the grid is being gamed by fossil fuel. Working families and small businesses are getting stuck paying the bill for a system that has been rigged by the Trump administration for big oil's benefit. Climate brings health dangers, and those health dangers are real. Fossil fuel production and combustion release toxins, benzene, hydrogen sulfide, particulate matter, to name just a few. And they have an effect. Children near fossil-fueled power plants and oil and gas wells suffer higher rates of asthma. Nearby communities experience higher rates of cancer, heart disease, and neurological damage. Air pollution just from fossil fuel production and combustion costs the average American about $2,500 in extra health care expense. And even if you don't suffer from heart or respiratory disease, you still pay more as insurance companies, health insurance companies, spread around across their customer base those added costs. Nationwide, that added cost is around $820 billion annually. That's a cost of fossil fuel. It's a cost of fossil fuel that fossil fuel doesn't pay, even though economics says externalities like this should be in the cost, in the price of the product. But that's the pollute for free business model. The industry externalizes their pollution costs, even in the hundreds of billions of dollars, onto families, onto hospitals, onto taxpayers, onto you. You pay for the mess they won't clean up. And of course, given the control of this building, fossil fuel companies benefit from enormous tax breaks and loopholes. This lost tax money means lost school funding, lost infrastructure funding, lost health care dollars. Real people lose real benefits. Just for one example, the corporate welfare polluters get just from direct fossil fuel subsidies could provide 3 million families with SNAP benefits, food for their kids and families. The $1 billion deal at Mar-a-Lago takes tax money straight from regular American taxpayers and hands it to billionaire oil barons. Last, let's consider lost opportunity. Because of fossil fuel corruption here at home, the industries of the future are now developing more overseas, abroad. The jobs of the future are being created abroad. The technologies of the future are being developed abroad. Here in the U.S., fossil fuel is diligently out to destroy these opportunities and the jobs and the future that comes with them, to protect its dying business model that cheats in the market while making our air smoggier and our water dirtier, polluting for free. China races ahead in renewable energy, electric vehicles, and clean technology as America is dragged further and further behind by fossil fuel political interference. That dirty deal day at Mar-a-Lago was a turning point. Donald Trump put our government up for sale, and the looters and polluters wrote the checks. And now, every agency, every policy, every decision reflects their ownership. EPA is their protector. DOJ is their law firm. Department of Energy is their henchman. Interior is their leasing agent. The State Department is their industry diplomat. Their oil Capone. The repeal of clean energy programs Trump got in his Beautiful for Billionaires bill is expected to cost the U.S. economy $1.1 trillion by 2035. In a decade, $1.1 trillion lost to the U.S. economy. That's a loss to all of us. Meanwhile, fossil fuel CEOs rake in as much as $40 million a year. Their companies make $30 billion a year. And the industry sponges up government subsidies of over $700 billion a year. That $700 billion is the bill the American people foot every year in more disasters, higher insurance premiums, higher electricity and fuel costs, worse family health, lost good jobs, and a dwindling economic future. With less clean energy, there will be more emissions. And with more emissions, there will be more disasters, pushing us towards the great climate insurance collapse. Everywhere are warnings from insurers, from economists, from bankers, from regulators, from the big short guy who predicted the Great Recession, from The Economist magazine, even from climate-shy Fed Chair Jay Powell. Warnings abound. Warnings are everywhere of climate economic disaster ahead. Is it too late to wake up? I hope not. Though for sure, our pathway to climate safety, it's narrowing. If we're going to solve the climate danger, we're going to have to take on the democracy danger. We do not have to accept the United States of America turning into a petrostate. We can still act. We can pass the Disclose Act to expose the dark money that enables fossil fuel corruption. We can call out and spotlight the climate denial fraud operation that has for so long deceived the American people. We can and must end the fossil fuel industry's corrupt, pollute-for-free business model, a model that violates the laws of economics as well as morality and decency. Why should polluter costs fall on taxpayers? It's simple. They shouldn't. Democracy also should not be for sale. Not to fossil fuel billionaires, not to Exxon, not to Chevron, not to Koch Industries, not to the American Petroleum Institute, not to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, nor the National Association of Manufacturers, for damn sure not to Donors Trust or to Leonard Leo. For a whole lot of reasons, with our climate safety right up at the top of the list, we have got to end the corruption. We've got to spotlight the dark money front groups and the armada of special interest organizations spreading fraud. Democracy needs to belong to the people, not to the highest bidder. When people understand what was done to them by fraud and corruption and dark money, there will be a mighty reckoning, and it cannot come too soon. So I conclude once again, as I have in 301 of these speeches, now for the 302nd time, time to wake up. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 3 p.m. on Monday.